Rick, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm very well. Yeah, looking forward to the end of restrictions or the slow easing of restrictions, maybe. But yeah, things are looking up. The sun is out.
However, they're positioning it now. Obviously, like the last year, kind of the pandemic has kind of brought all sorts of challenges. From your perspective, in terms of cybersecurity and the move to remote working, how have we fared? I mean, and when I say we, I suppose, how have big companies fared and how have SMEs fared? And what's your outlook on it at the moment?
For me, it's been what I've noticed is that it's really been a period of acceleration for businesses. So the advent of all the changes in the way that we work that was brought on by the pandemic really accelerated plans that organizations had by probably about 5 years. And I think other things too, like the way that we go shopping, the amount of, or the way that restaurants provide food, a lot of that is really stuff that would have happened anyway, but it's been massively accelerated. So adoption of cloud within enterprises, for example, they have to take stuff that was previously only internally available and make sure that their vastly distributed workforce all working from home can access all the same resources all the time to be able to get their jobs done. So adoption of that kind of technology accelerated changes to working practices. Like we don't actually, there's no reason why we have to start working at 9 o'clock and end at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever. We can start when it fits with what else is going on in our houses and end much later in the day, when, I don't know, the kids are in bed or whatever. So changes to working practices, adoption of technology for sure. And I think the high street, the face of the high street has forever been changed, and we'll see a lot of businesses now beginning to divest property portfolio as well, as they realize that actually that's a capital expenditure that they don't need on their books.
So I was speaking to another speaker a few weeks ago, and they were talking about this. And one of the things they said was our biggest challenge is as we start returning, maybe not returning, as we get to this hybrid model of working from home and kind of remote working and working from an office, where the heads of companies revert back to where we were before, because actually what they put in place was temporary solutions to get them through the pandemic. How forward thinking do you think people have been? Or
I think a lot of what has happened in terms of, so certainly that cloud adoption and acceleration of services, that's not something that's going to be reversed. And the same is, you asked about SMEs before, smaller businesses. Same for them. People have noticed that actually I don't need to be running and maintaining all of this stuff on premises myself. That actually isn't my core business. And if I can use something as a service, Office 365, Google Apps, whatever it might be, then I can actually focus on making sure that my company stays afloat, and hopefully further down the road, making sure that we're making good profit because somebody else is looking after the stuff that isn't my area of expertise. So no more IT for IT's sake is kind of the future of technology. And it's the biggest reason why enterprises large and small are not going to reverse these changes, because it's lower cost, greater flexibility. Actually, the possibility to secure it is higher, and greater agility. And it's more flexibility. You're able to change and flex to meet circumstances. I think we've realized over the past 12 to 18 months that we don't know what's around the corner. And one of the recent exercises I've been involved in that we're publishing at RSA actually is a very big white paper, 20-something pages, called Project 2030, where actually we've tried to imagine the next 10 years of technological change and imagine what that means to an individual, to a business, and to a nation state, and what the criminal opportunities will be in that brave new world of 2030. And the pandemic featured a lot in baselining and extrapolating out to make those future scenarios.
The media hype up the kind of the security and espionage and the risks around the whole thing. Do you think it's an unfair rap, or do you think actually we aren't as aware as we should be?
I started my technology career in 1994, so it's a very different world than it was when I first started. And I've been in the business of security, pure play security, since before the turn of the century. So either way you look at it, I've been focused on it for a long time, and I've seen a lot of changes in the way that criminals operate. In fact, I've seen the birth of cybercrime and then its evolution throughout the couple of decades when it's really been an organized criminal endeavor. But I've seen also hugely growing public awareness of the fact that they are at risk and there is a problem, whether that's consumer or business, and not just awareness that there's a risk, but also awareness of the kinds of threats that are faced. And what I've been really impressed with over the years is how the quality of journalism has increased when it comes to talking about technology and talking about crime, making it meaningful for the reader, but also making it transparently educational, being able to explain something in very clear terms that the person reading the article can learn from. And I'm actually being asked fewer and fewer basic questions by journalists, which is a really good thing.
I suppose from my perspective, that's great from the media perspective. Are we getting ahead of the criminal activity, and are we going to see a time where actually innately, kind of as individuals, we feel secure in this cyber world?
No. I'd love to give a beautiful, wonderful, positive answer to that. It's the kind of thing that should have a positive answer. But like I've been asked, are we ever going to defeat cybercrime? And my answer is usually we'll defeat cybercrime on the same day as we defeat all the other crime, which is, there will always be crime, and an increasing measure of that will always be cyber. Just look at the news today. The biggest and most important oil pipeline between Texas and New York, their enterprise network is currently locked down with ransomware and no oil is flowing whatsoever. So attackers are constantly learning, they're constantly shifting their tools, techniques, practices. So yes, we've got better, for example, at handling consumer-focused or individual-focused ransomware. People learned that criminals could compromise their computer, encrypt their data, and then demand a ransom to give it back. So people started changing how they did things. They started using cloud storage. They started keeping backups at home. They paid maybe a little bit more attention to their security software, making sure it was kept up to date, those kinds of things. So criminals adapted. They realized, A, that it was getting more difficult to demand a ransom because people would recover from backups, and B, that they needed to go after bigger targets. So they've kind of shifted focus to looking now at enterprises and things like this oil pipeline, very carefully selecting a target, doing a lot of research up front, making sure they know everything they need to know about the corporate environment and the users, and quietly spreading through the network, moving laterally, finding data of interest, systems of interest, and waiting until the exact right moment before they kick off their campaign, lock everything down. And then they know, they've got the backups, or they've made it so that one of the points of conjecture right now about the oil pipeline is they've made it so that the oil company can't bill anybody. They haven't actually compromised the industrial network, but they've compromised the correct systems on the enterprise network. That means they can't send any oil anywhere because they can't bill anyone for it, and locked it all down. So criminals are constantly evolving and constantly probing for new weak spots.
So let me take you to a more positive light. In the last year since the pandemic, what's happened over the last year that's excited you from a positive aspect rather than from a criminal aspect?
Looking particularly at cybercrime, then we have seen the takedown of one of the most important, arguably the most important criminal groups, take down their infrastructure. At least it's a piece of malware called Immortality, which was extremely widespread, and it was basically being used as what we call an access as a service platform. So they were compromising computers all around the world, in homes, but also very much in businesses and enterprises. And then Immortality was being used as a platform for the distribution of lots of other things, like ransomware, for example. It was being used as a platform for data theft, and they were effectively renting out access to compromised devices as a service. And it was an extremely important network, and we saw concerted law enforcement activity involved the UK, involved the FBI, involved the Dutch high-tech crime unit, one of the Baltics countries. It was 5 or 6 countries all working together with the help of private enterprise to actually take down this infrastructure and remedy the problem. And that's been successful. So that's great. And we see increasingly effective law enforcement activity. On the other side, from a technology perspective, that acceleration is exciting because it's definitely technology that benefits business, being able to plan more effectively into the future, being able to get rid of the vast data. You don't need to run your own data center anymore. You don't need to be responsible for the operating systems that you're running anymore. In large cases, you don't even have to be responsible for the applications that you're running anymore. Because from a security perspective, when you start using something as a service in the cloud, then all of the maintenance and all of the security updates and configuration, you've outsourced that too, in large part. So when you think about something like the vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange that we saw a month or so ago that were very important and were being very widely compromised, possibly in nation state sponsored activity from China, that didn't affect people who were using Office 365 because that had all been kept up to date by Microsoft. It was only the people who hadn't been able to apply the updates. So with that adoption of cloud and as a service, we do end up in a more secure place, which is, you know, where we want to be.
So you mentioned it earlier, 2030, you said. Give us a couple of sneak insights on what you believe we're going to see moving forward.
We've got three scenarios, one for the individual, one for a manufacturer with a 200-year pedigree. So we're going to take something that's sort of recognizable today and put it 10 years in the future, and one for a nation state. They're all interlinked. There are interdependencies, possible points of acceleration or of conflict between all of these different scenarios. So for the user, you know, we talk about what we've also done, and I should make it very clear, is we haven't tried to predict the future of the world. What we've done is we've taken all of the technological advances that we think are credible within the next 10 years and set them all in one fictional country, all happening in the same place at the same time. So we're predicting a future which is not probable in its entirety anywhere, but possible in lots of different places. If you see what I mean. So from a consumer perspective, definitely wearable technology you know, starts life in the consumer space and in the medical space, and they kind of converge in our everyday lives. You know, we might have clothing which tells us when we need to or maybe even orders for us when we need to go up a size. You know, it's watching our measurements, our waistline, our shoulders, our height, whatever. Great for kids' clothes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like reorder every month or something, depending on your child. There are technologies like additive manufacturing. So 10 years from now, there will be some households that are printing their own food at home. This technology already exists. It's in its infancy, but it allows you to create from scratch ingredients, printed steak, you know, maybe because as we're moving towards a more vegetarian, meat-free diet for health purposes, for environmental purposes, this is one way for people who like to eat meat to still get something which approaches meat. So additive manufacturing in the home, in terms of that, we're talking about medical sensors, things like in contact lenses or skin patches that are measuring lacrimal fluids or sweat for diagnosis, which would trigger then further interventions or maybe drug delivery to your drug printer at home. All things that I'm sure you could tell will need securing effectively. Technologies like that. So the connected home definitely is one thing. From a business perspective, a lot more automation, a lot more hands-off manufacturing, a much greater use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Obviously 10 years from now, we'll actually be looking at the rollout of 6G. So with 5G, which is kind of in its infancy for us today, that will be in 10 years from now, that will be where we are now with 4G, which is completely comfortable and completely universal. What 5G enables is all of these different devices, whether it's vehicles, sensors, actuators, devices in the home, devices on the shop floor, manufacturing, to be connected and exchanging information in real time. So in an enterprise, for example, your production line would mostly automated, mostly robotic, entirely connected, sending real-time data to a digital twin of your production line. So you can do real-time hazard monitoring, real-time asset condition monitoring, and able to apply preventative maintenance in the real world, because you can watch how things are going to develop in your digital twin using real-time data from 5G to the digital twin. From a nation state perspective, again, a lot of AI and machine learning, a lot of debates around collection of data and protection of data and consent to collect and process people's data. I think a lot of popular resistance over the next 10 years, and a lot of reclaiming of our own right to profit from our own data rather than giving it to somebody else to profit from. Definitely the rise of the synthetic human, the digital human. You know, we talk about influencers now. Expect in the next 10 years to see synthetic influencers. So people running Instagram accounts or whatever the future Instagram is that have never really existed, but they're there influencing. Expect politicians to be appearing in public without appearing in public, appearing as a digital version of themselves, supplying only their voice, or maybe not even their voice, maybe that's digitally generated too. The same with actors. But of course, on the flip side of that, the same with influence operations by nation states. You know, we're talking about fake news and meddling with elections and that kind of stuff. Imagine that in a future where you know, the Prime Minister of the UK or the President of the US could appear and say something and it's news and it looks real. And as people, we've been desensitized to being able to tell the difference because it's become a part of our everyday life to see these synthetic humans. And then there's a lot more, but the last one I'll mention now, because it kind of goes alongside the technology for synthetic humans, image and voice. I think by 2030, digital versions of ourselves may well begin to outlive us. So we may start talking about digital immortality, something that you're feeding throughout your lifetime with data about yourself. Maybe have a daily conversation, plus it scans everything you do on all your social networks, maybe your emails and so on and so on. And then when you die, or even maybe while you're alive, it becomes you, it replaces you, it interacts as you. And increasingly these digital humans will begin to have agency, and they will be able to act independently and then do bad things, criminal things, malicious things, unexpected things. So expect to see grieving relatives campaigning that their loved one isn't switched off, or perhaps even campaigning that they are. These are all things that, believe it or not, I and my co-author, Vic Baines, believe that are entirely possible and credible within the next 10 years, and plenty more besides.
Currently in 2021, where do you think we are as individuals and as a society in our acceptance of AI and our fear of it?
So AI is a very overarching term, yes, in which there are many different subsets. So a lot of those subsets of AI are already in widespread use and have been, certainly in my industry, for 15 years or so. We've been using machine learning to classify spam emails, for example, for 15 years. So machine learning is widely established and has a whole load of different use cases, and a whole load of really exciting project use cases, and really exciting and fun. Like there are projects online where, for example, you can go and have a conversation with Plato and ask Plato's opinion about things. You can go and talk to Shakespeare about his writing. Imagine the prospects for that in an education scenario. We're increasingly reaching the point with education where we have instant access to the sum of the world's knowledge available for all of us. So education now needs to focus much more on not learning things, because we don't really need to learn things. It's more about how to process knowledge. It's a different kind of education. So machine learning can really help in that kind of respect. You don't have to learn facts about Shakespeare. You can have a conversation with Shakespeare and understand why he wrote something the way he did, or what he meant when he wrote something. We're definitely seeing machine learning and AI in the field of medicine advancing, and the speed and reliability of diagnoses are immeasurably improved by these kinds of technologies. We'll begin to see them much more in self-driving vehicles, and that's enabled also by 5G and cloud edge processing, and of course artificial intelligence, image recognition, image processing, machine learning, all the different areas of AI, and it will necessarily enhance our lives. So I think that as a public, we're willing to take on board the fact that AI is improving things for us. And if you are looking for a parallel, like, well, won't it negatively affect us? Are we going to have nothing left to do? Well, in some ways, I'd love to have nothing left to do. That would be great. But actually what it will do is, just like the Industrial Revolution, in fact, a lot of people are calling aspects of this Industrial Revolution 4.0, it doesn't render us pointless. It doesn't render our existence pointless. It actually elevated us. It elevated us then to do more and achieve greater things, and it will elevate us now. If you're in a data processing job, which is going to be replaced by machine learning because it can do it faster, better, and more reliably than a human, then your position will be elevated to that of a data scientist. You'll be looking at the outcome of the machine learning and checking whether you think that was the right thing to do, or making a recommendation for what to do based on the data. But just like any industrial revolution, it elevates us as humans. It doesn't subjugate us or make us any less valuable. Quite the opposite, in fact.
Rick, and on that inspirational and uplifting endpoint, Rik Ferguson, thank you so much indeed for your time. As
Pleasure,
always,
thank you.
Pleasure speaking to you.